Good morning, everyone. It's a delight to see everyone on this bright and sunny Southern California morning. We're so delighted that you could join us today. This is such an important event, and we're delighted to host it here. My name is Ernest Wilson, and I'm the Dean of the Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism at the University of Southern California. And it is a real pleasure on behalf of the entire university as well as the Annenberg School to welcome all of you here today, which is the 6th celebration of the Walter Cronkite Award for Excellence in Television Political Journalism. I especially want to welcome our prize winners. I was having a conversation earlier with these 4 or 5 really interesting people, and we're having a great discussion, and I put on my glasses. I said, "Oh, you're the prize winners." It really is a pleasure to have all of them here this morning, and we look forward to having a great day of conversation with you. Many of us here today remember Walter Cronkite's nightly television broadcasts. In fact, some in this room were fortunate enough to have met or known the gentleman. As communicators, journalists, and also as citizens, we've all benefited from the rigorous reporting, high standards, and personal integrity that always characterized his work. With this morning's symposium and the awards lunch that will follow, we honor today's TV journalists who seek to deliver the same kind of quality and integrity that he did. Because the discourse that you lead and the facts that you report on are essential to American democracy. And to the extent that that is under threat, that American democracy is under threat. And to the extent that you succeed, American democracy succeeds. So we're really, really delighted to have you here with us. Let me just say a few words about our school, the Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism. For many years it was called the Annenberg School for Communication. And just recently, last year, in an effort to underscore the importance of journalism, we added that to our nomenclature. The president, former President Steve Sample, had heard this story so much from those of us in the journalism school and the profession that when he announced the name, and Wallace Annenberg and others were there, he said, "The name of the school is the Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism, damn it." So he underscored the importance there. We have about 100 full-time faculty, about 100 adjuncts, 2,200 students. We offer BAs, MAs, PhDs, professional training. We have about 14 research and training centers here at the school. We are also proud to say, and it may even be true, that I think we have the second largest newsroom in Los Angeles after the LA Times. So we're very proud about that. It makes a dean somewhat nervous because in the old days, students would just write stuff and it would appear on campus. Now it's appearing on the desk of the mayor and certain civic organizations. And so I get these damn telephone calls. And little did I know that I was going to become a publisher in the process of this. But our students are doing prize-winning work here. I do want to recognize one of the reasons that we've been so successful over the past couple of years, and that's Geneva Overholzer, who's the director of our journalism school. Geneva, would you just stand up for a moment and take a bow? Thank you. When I was going through this, and we were suffering the flings and arrows of outrageous fortune from various folks, Geneva said, "Well, don't worry, everybody likes journalism in principle, but not everybody likes journalism done to them," which is a fine distinction, I'd now like to introduce someone who's been administering these biennial awards since 2000, and this, of course, is Marty Kaplan. Now, Marty may have started here since 2000, but I've actually known the gentleman since 1968, when we were both 4 years old in college. Marty is an energetic, innovative, brilliant, creative person. Then, when he was editor of the Harvard Lampoon, and he remains all of those things today and has become even more so. And so we really are lucky to have him as a member of the Annenberg School community. And so without further ado, let me introduce my good friend Marty Kaplan.
Thank you, Ernie. Ernie, did you just take my notepad?
I said you were innovative and brilliant, so let's see.
Thank you all for being here. It's going to be a great day, and there are others who will be joining us as the traffic and their lives permit. The Norman Lear Center, for those of you who don't know, has been around since 2000, and what it looks at is what people pay attention to, how attention is grabbed and held and monetized, and what the impact of that is on democracy and society. And so obviously news is a big part of what we look at. The Cronkite Awards, as Ernie mentioned, have been administered since 2000. What we'll be doing today, there'll be a panel discussion, and I will invite you all to be part of that discussion. And then we will go downstairs, and all of you are warmly invited. Even if you didn't RSVP, we'll find a place for you for the awards lunch, in which at which point each of the award winners whom you see here will be able to accept their awards. I watched the news today. Oh boy, as John Lennon might have said. I learned all about the suspense about Kate's dress. I learned what Kendra did last night on Dancing with the Stars. Someone I think also, Christina, you might have seen that too. And not much more than that in terms of civic information. In fact, at the Lear Center last year, we did a study of the LA media market, looking at every single television station, local TV station, every news broadcast, round the clock for 14 days. And we found that in a composite half hour, the amount of time devoted to all aspects of politics, governance, and issues in a given half hour was 22 seconds. So I must have missed that while I was watching this morning. There's a quote. I'd like to read you some words that Walter Cronkite used when he was last able to participate in the Cronkite Awards, which was the last session 2 years ago. He said this to all of the winners. We inhabit an age when journalism is saddled with inflated profit expectations from Wall Street, when news budgets are rarely up to the task of raising the floor of viewers' understanding of the world, when a soundbite culture turns political campaigns into political theater. But against those odds, you and your colleagues are doing an exemplary job. Your award is recognition that you are committed to getting it right, making it compelling, and serving the public interest. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, and the you he was talking about are also the yous who are here today. So I'd like to start by introducing to you the panelists, and I will ask you to wait until I've introduced them all, which will be midday tomorrow, for your applause. And I know it will be warm. And I'll start at that end and work my way here. What we have in some cases are teams, and in some cases individuals. And in just about every case, those you see here today are part of larger teams. None of this happens without the work of a lot of dedicated colleagues. So I won't be mentioning their names today. I'll just be describing the people who are up here. And in the first case, I'll draw a distinction which may or may not be useful as we have our panel discussion between two kinds of species. One is the suits. These are the executives who make the hard decisions and work for other executives, and in many cases, what we are honoring today would not have happened without the commitment of those executives. And with them are the correspondents and on-air talent. And in the first case, for example, on the end over there, we have a team from KOMO in Seattle. They won the award for the Cronkite Award for an individual station, which the judges this year divided into large market and small market, and so Seattle won the large market category. And with Holly Gaunt is Dan Lewis, who is KOMO anchor. Next to them is the small market winner, which is it's the Salinas station, KIONKCBA. Central Coast News, I think, is the easiest way of describing it. And Matt Stein, who is the executive producer, is here representing that station. Next, we have the cable category of winner, and in this case, it's Central Florida 13 News, which is based in Orlando, and Robin Smythe, who is vice president and general manager, is here representing. Sorry? Suit. Yes. Yeah, actually, there really are some suits on the suits, aren't there? Thank you for doing that. And then we have a team for the public station category. This year, the local public station award was won by KPBS in San Diego, which is owned by San Diego State. And representing them is Natalie Walsh, senior producer, and Joanne Farion, who is a producer and also host. And then next to them is the winner in the national news program category, and that's the PBS NewsHour. And we have the political editor, David Chalian, and next to him, Gwen Eiffel, who is the senior correspondent on the NewsHour, and also you know her from her role as managing editor and moderator of Washington Week. Then we have the winner of the Group of Stations Award for their performance across the station group, and representing them, the vice president of news for the winner, Hearst, is Candy Altman. And then next to Candy is a winner who received a special commendation, and he is at a Hearst station, which is WISN in Milwaukee, and he is a political analyst, contributing anchor, and reporter. That's Mike Goucher. And then another team, 3 strong in this case, and I know they could have brought more because there's enthusiasm there. We have from KSL in Salt Lake City, we have Tanya Vea, who is, I love her title, Executive Vice President of News and Cross-Platform Development. We have John Daly, who is a reporter at KSL, and Lisa Riley Roche, who is a staff writer at the Deseret News, and her collaboration here is an interesting story about what's happening in newsrooms around the country. And then here is Christina Boomer, whose title is Multimedia Journalist, and we'll find out why that is. She is at KNXV in Phoenix, and she won individual achievement at a local station. The KSL group won a special commendation for investigative reporting, and the WISN, Mike Goucher, won a special commendation for a town hall challenge. So please join me in welcoming the Cronkite winners. So I'm going to wander around here so you don't have to crane your necks. And sorry for giving you my back. But I want to start by asking a question that relates to the mission of the Lear Center, which is looking at what makes attention grabbed and held. What is compelling in the realm of news? There is often a saying in newsrooms that covering politics and government and issues is ratings poison. And so my question for any of you to take is that at all true? Is that something you have to work against in getting stuff on the air? Are there things that you need to do consciously to make covering politics, government, and substantive issues compelling and attention-grabbing?
You know, one of the things that struck me when we won this award was years ago, but not that many, I had a consultant tell me in a meeting, don't use the word politics in a tease or to promote a story. Said it was a turnoff. Just yesterday I told somebody I was going to be on this panel, somebody that I didn't expect this kind of reaction, and he said, well, the best way to cover politics on TV is don't do any. So there is that hurdle, there is that. But I think, you know, it's their perception of what's politics, whether it's getting lost in all the political discourse. When we can break it down to the issues and show them how it impacts their lives, then you kind of maybe trap them into watching because they find out, wait, I am interested in this after all.
And while I have you, Dan, and Holly, let me just ask you to describe one aspect of why you won the award. If the Problem Solvers Voters Guide. Can you describe what that was?
Sure. Do you want we basically took all of the ballot initiatives and assigned a reporter to every one and then broke them down to very basics so people could understand it. We also, throughout the hour, we took the two senatorial candidates and we asked them each, I think, about 5 questions. And so in each block, we did a point-counterpoint kind of thing with them. But mostly it was issue-driven. And to speak to your point before, I think it's really interesting. One of my competitors in Seattle, when we won this award, said, sure, you got it on production value, because it's one of the things the judges wrote. And I pointed out that it was writing in production value. But, you know, to your point, you have to make it interesting. They're not going to watch. If the writing isn't interesting, if the production isn't interesting, you've got to draw them in. Because it is true that some people switch the channel as soon as you get to politics. So I think we succeeded in drawing them in visually and with the information and with the writing.
I think one of the things that we did visually that was very effective is we used the green screen for a floor map. And I walked around the map describing where Senator Murray had her support and where the Republican challenger Dino Rossi needed his. It went on for a couple of minutes.
We'll see not a couple of minutes, but an excerpt of it at lunch today.
Yeah, and it was, yes, maybe a little flashy, certainly creative, but very effective. And it's those sort of things, along with use of the telestrator or screenwriter, to just, you know, jazz it up a little bit, but still deal with the facts and the issues.
You can make politics interesting. It's not that hard. You can make politics interesting. You just have to work at it.
Anyone else want to take up this question of whether it's hard to make politics interesting, or the climate of saying that you could do that, or the challenges and how you overcame?
I think, though, when we look at the last couple of months, though, I think we have, thankfully, a nation that's pretty involved anyway. Wouldn't you agree? I mean, if you look at just the Tea Party movement, whether you love it or hate it, the fact is that we have a pretty engaged American public right now that I think more than ever understands the connection of politics to their lives. It's just, that's what makes our job hard, right? It's our job to make that connection very quickly for them about how what's happening with our elected officials affects them on a day-to-day life. And I don't really think it's that difficult, because the reality is it does. Everything we do is affected by politics. Every aspect of our life is affected by politics. It's just our job to make that connection pretty quick right off the top so they get it and they get why they want to pay attention. Once you got the hook on that, then they'll follow through and watch the rest.
And I think the challenge...
I'm sorry, just a quick follow-up, as you all sometimes do. Christina, in your application to the Cronkite Award, you spoke about fighting to get your stories on the air. So why do you have to fight if it's so compelling?
Well, one thing I was going to bring up in my acceptance speech actually is talking about how reporters are only as good as the internal gatekeepers that exist, you know, and that's the managers and the producers that give you the green light or don't give you the green light. And you know, when you talk about commercial broadcast television, I mean, you are up against the stories of the day. I mean, that's just the reality of what we do. So you might have a wonderful issue-oriented piece, but if somebody just shot 3 people and an officer, guess what? You know, you're not going to make that story that day. Which is fine, though, because you can still run it the next day. The fighting part is also an aspect of understanding those constraints and working with your managers and still being able to fight for that story to make sure it makes it on air at some point. Maybe it's a later broadcast, maybe it's only online, maybe it's later that week. But I feel like it's my job to keep on that and to be persistent to make sure that, you know, obviously those stories that I think are so important to the community still make it on the air, because at the end of the day, the managers think they're important too. They just also have to weigh all the other news content that's happening that day. And so I think also each of us that are sitting here wouldn't be sitting here if it really wasn't for our managers and our station leaders who allowed us to do the stories, because really they could have put the kibosh on all of us and we wouldn't be sitting here. So it's really also a recognition to their efforts.
Candy?
I think there is a lot more engagement and interest now, but I think part of our job is also to get beyond the yelling and the screaming and, you know, and the vitriol that I think is associated so much with political coverage now, and get to the issues that you're talking about, because politics is really just about issues like education and healthcare and things that people really do care about and that really do affect their lives, but also take things like the bickering and try and make it interesting. Our station in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, took a bunch of congressional candidates, brought them to a habitat house, and had them work on the house together. I mean, these are people who refuse to talk to each other, Democrats and Republicans.
And you put hammers
and
in
yeah, and they put hammers and nails, exactly. And they spent the day working together on this house. And you know, it was a little chilly to start. You know, they weren't really connecting. But as time went on, they had to talk to each other about issues, and the reporter was prompting them on issues of working together and bipartisanship, and using that habitat experience as a metaphor for working together, and the station ran that over a period of days. So it was taking a political issue, not even necessarily an issue, you know, of mortgage rates or healthcare or something that would affect an average person's life, but trying to turn that negativity into something positive. And I think that's the challenge, and that's the creative challenge. That's where, you know, where it's fun to come up with an idea that would get people engaged in an issue. You know, whereas if you did just a story about bipartisan bickering, that would be a turnoff.
How many per stations?
We have 25 stations that produce news.
And there is a top-down policy from Hearst to those stations that involves campaign and political coverage. Can you describe what you asked them to do?
Well, in the 30 days leading up to the election, specifically, we tell them to do that they must do 10 minutes a day of candidate-centered coverage. They can do more than that if they want, but you know, we want to make sure that through the course of the day, there's more than just horse race coverage. There's issue coverage, and there's discussion, discussion of those issues. So that's kind of the basic thing, and that grew out of the Gore Commission in 1999, and a recommendation that stations do 5 minutes a day of candidate-centered coverage, which we started doing in 2000, and then expanded that in 2006 to 10 minutes.
Just as a plug for another piece of Lear Center research, when the Gore Commission report came out and asked for 5 minutes a day for the 30 days prior to the election, I learned, much to my interest, that there was no way set up to monitor that or to find out what anyone did. And so we decided to do it, and it was at that point technologically much more complicated. We gathered tape from stations all over the country to see what they actually did, because the big point of the commission was this was a voluntary commitment, and the average was 45 seconds. So it's a standout sometimes because there's a policy from the top down that mandates it.
Marty, if I can pick up on something
Please.
that Christina said, because I feel pretty strongly about this notion that everything is politics. Maybe we can't use the word all the time, maybe we have to disguise it in some sort of candy coating. But the truth is, politics affects whether your kids go to school or not, or whether they go to jail. Politics affects whether you're able to pay your mortgage or whether you're going to be foreclosed. All of the deals that are being cut, all of the horse trading that's going on that we despise so much, it really affects people's lives. So our responsibility then is to figure out how to tell a story about things that affect your lives, not just tell a story about a political horse race. At the News Hour, because we have a country to cover and we have like a huge midterm election to cover, our goal then is to start with the issues and work backward to the candidates. We're trying to figure out what are the four, say there are 4 states we want to go to. They're going to tell us the story of where the nation is right now. That's why we cover politics. It's why we cover conventions. It's why we cover the horse race. And so we start, a lot of people say all the political coverage is horse race and reading polls. We start with the polls and we read what do the polls tell us about the issues which are of greatest concern to Americans. And then we back into which are the states where we can most illustrate those issues. And then we say which are the races. Instead of starting with the races and working our way up with the personalities, we find a way. And then we try to combine it, this is a tricky part, with the most interesting and consequential races in the country. And so it turns out that Florida is a country. It's kind of a country. It's kind of
In its own special way.
I call it the news place that keeps on giving. And Florida is a beautiful place. But 1 in 5 houses there are in foreclosure. So if you're going to do a story about issues and you want to do a story about the thing that's dogging people, you go to a place where that's being debated. And it just so happens there's always an interesting Senate race or an interesting congressional race which allows you to tell the story. It's working from the back toward the front, and then you will always end up with a compelling story if you start with the idea rather than the individual.
And so you chose for this season Florida, Wisconsin, Nevada, and Kentucky. David, could you describe a little bit more about that?
Well, as Gwen was saying, in selecting where to go, we look for how can we tell a national narrative and find an example in these places. So, Kentucky with Rand Paul provided sort of a perfect way to get into the Tea Party phenomenon because he was so strongly identified with it. Florida, for what Gwen was just describing, I mean, it was going through the economic strife so acutely that everyone was feeling across the country that that's sort of what brought us there, but it ended up having this 3-way compelling race that sort of was telling the story beyond just the Tea Party, but what was happening inside the Republican Party with the Charlie Crist and Marco Rubio divide and Crist bolting from that party. And, the Kendrick Meek fact. I mean, Gwen happened to be in Florida as this whole effort to get Kendrick Meek, Democrats sort of trying to push him out of the race and try to use Charlie Crist like Bill Clinton. Exactly.
I'm afraid I'm the one who broke it to him. Yeah. He was being pushed out of the race. So
that was all happening when Gwen was on the ground there. So we got into this other great dynamic that was going inside the Democratic Party there at the time. Nevada, obviously the Senate Majority Leader, when you're dealing with a midterm election and you want to somehow nationalize it, as Tom Daschle had the unfortunate experience of nationalizing it in 2004. Harry Reid was not only up against a Tea Party-backed candidate, but the majority leader at the time, still is. And what was the last state? Oh, Wisconsin. Actually, Wisconsin was one of my favorite stories of the cycle because that we went at because it hit the anti-incumbency, anti-Washington thing. Russ Feingold is known, his whole brand is known as being sort of a renegade against the party, very not looked at as sort of ingrained in Washington. He's always been sort of that mavericky thing. And yet, he did not wake up early enough to what was happening in the country just by being in Washington and serving there, that he was going to get wrapped into this sort of anti-incumbent fever. And you had a really skilled candidate in Ron Johnson on the other side, but Russ Feingold one Democratic consultant explained to me that one of the worst television ads they thought of the entire cycle was a Russ Feingold ad where in that year, that anti-incumbent year, he is boasting about his 30 years in Washington. It was just a completely wrong message. He was trying to run on his record of independence, but he just reminded the voters of how much time he had spent in Washington. And if he, of all people, can get swept up in a wave like that, I thought that, helped tell a larger story of what was going on.
We see what's happened in Wisconsin since. It turns out that was just the beginning of a story which is still unfolding. And I might add, we got an email this morning from Senator Rubio congratulating us on our Cronkite Award. We don't know how to take that.
I was going to add that I work in Wisconsin, And and we have had a fair number of things happening there in the last few months.
Mike, would you describe the Town Hall Challenge?
Well, we did, and this predates all the fun stuff that we've had in the last several months in Wisconsin over collective bargaining. But yeah, we did 3 different, what we refer to as Town Hall Challenges. 2 involved the governor's race, and 1 was the U.S. Senate race with Russ Feingold and Ron Johnson. They were 90 minutes in length, and the purpose of them was to...
no ads, right?
No ads, prime time, I think they were Friday nights. And the point was that we wanted to involve our audience in these presentations. So there was a segment where I would question the candidates in a roundtable format, but then we would bring in audience members. And when I say audience, it's a statewide audience, and these are people in all parts of Wisconsin. We did, I think, 6 or 7 different live remotes simultaneously, and these were citizens who were identified by our producer, either through letters to the editor, things that they did at Common Council meetings. We used a lot of different sources to find these people and ask them to formulate questions. Come up with questions that you can put directly to these candidates. And that's the way the format worked. After about 15 minutes of sort of a free-flowing conversation between the 3 of us, we then bring in the audience members from all around the state. And they have very divergent opinions on certain issues, but they were great. And we gave them a chance, if the candidate did not respond in a way they felt was appropriate or was dodging the question or moving on to something else, we gave them the chance to ask a follow-up. Was that a satisfactory answer to your question? And sometimes they would say, no, it was not. We still want to hear about this. And so the idea there was really to take this another step and to make sure that the citizens in the state had a say in what was before them. And we thought it was smart, engaging television, and I think the feedback was very positive. And I also might say that as we talk about coverage of politics, we do a weekly show, statewide show, on politics every week. But exactly as Gwen said, what we try to do is break it down into the issues that affect people's lives. And I think if you tell that story consistently, and that you don't insult people. People are very smart. They know when they're being talked down to. So you have to talk to them in adult terms about what's going on, and I think they like that. I mean, the response to our program, to the debates, has been very heartening, very gratifying. So I think that it's all in the telling of the stories, and it's also, I will say this, I do think that it depends somewhat on the market, and it depends somewhat on the corporation that owns the station. Because I have heard, just like Dan and Holly, I've heard that too, where they say, just don't do politics. People don't want to hear about it.
Well, I think in the telling of the story too, and it's what Gwen was saying, when you work your way backwards, the issues first, and you work your way back to the candidates, then the last thing you're dealing with is that gridlock, that Obama won't ever agree with McConnell, that Boehner will never agree with Pelosi, which I think is the big turnoff for so many people. They just can't take that anymore. They hear it so much and it doesn't go anywhere. So starting with what affects them first and work your way back is a great way to do it.
Mike, you're a Milwaukee station, right, but you found a novel way to distribute to the rest of the state. Could you describe how you did that?
Yeah, we have, as part of our Sunday show, we have basically a network of affiliates around the state that carry the show. And so we asked them, would you set aside 90 minutes in prime time? It's, a big deal for television stations, commercial free, and would you join us in this venture? And we found great cooperation. And we were able to utilize some of their facilities to help work with, to help execute this. And so it was not as difficult as you might imagine. I think the stations were looking for an opportunity to present something that they felt really did engage the people who live in their communities. So I described it as an elaborate technical ballet. It definitely was that, trying to juggle everything.
Matt, Central Coast News really rolled the dice on people's interest in politics. You invited how many candidates?
200.
200 candidates.
Yeah. Something we decided to do was, at the end of the day, most people do view politics as something that can be boring. They look beyond the fact that it really is something that impacts everyone. Being here in California, we can't get a budget done. Schools are, having teachers laid off, and it's all because of politics. So something we decided to do was to take the politicians and say, come on into our studio and give the viewer your direct message. We won't edit it. We won't do anything. You get a minute during our newscast.
And these are people who didn't have big budgets for paid media.
Most of them, I mean, we had, Gavin Newsom come down from San Francisco. He had plenty of money. But most of them were water board people, school district people, and they described why they were doing what they needed to do, how they planned on doing it, the changes that they made. Something that we're trying to do is really get the community involved. A lot of the candidates we would then pull aside afterwards and say, hey, so-and-so emailed us or so-and-so Facebooked us and wants to know this. And we would do follow-up Q&A with them. And our viewers really felt that we were taking their concerns and their questions to the candidates compared to, well, how do you plan on getting this taken care of? I live on South Main Street, and you keep telling me the sidewalk's going to be fixed. It's not fixed. What's going on about it? Why should I vote for you for city council when you can't fix my sidewalk? And people felt, well, we're getting answers for them. And a lot of times, it's what everyone talks about, the horse race of just, here's what the numbers are, here's where it stands, and it's more than that. And when the community feels involved in the coverage, they have a reason to care. It's not just us spewing the same old stuff over and over again, but they're getting their questions answered.
You mentioned schools. Could you describe how you went about covering the impact of the budget crisis on schools?
The UC system likes to protest. A lot of the schools on the Central Coast of California like to protest. We were there at all of them, asking the students how this was changing their lives. And it wasn't just, well, I can't afford college. Okay, well, if you can't afford college, what are you going to do what are you going to do instead? We'd go with them on their side jobs to make money. And we actually had a reporter spend a day with a young lady who was working 2 jobs and going to school full time. And we showed she could barely sleep. I mean, between studying, going to school, doing her jobs, she barely had enough time in the day to sleep. So it's really showing that personal impact as to how it's affecting people compared to just the same old protest at UC Santa Cruz.
Robin, Matt mentioned water, and I wonder if you would describe what is soil and water.
Can I just say, when he said water board, I thought they had to torture people.
No, I'm sorry. Water's a big deal in California, especially the Central Coast. We don't have enough of it. Sorry.
We have too much of it, so we'll trade you.
We'll take some.
The soil and water story, we have an interesting challenge in Florida because along the I-4 corridor, which has become this very strong political force, half the people who live there did not live there 10 years ago. It's hard to be entrenched in issues and feel like this is home when you're still unpacking your Beacons boxes. So to touch those folks and to get their attention on things, sometimes we don't dumb it down, but we do take the ABC approach where we start at the beginning and it has a middle and an end, and we tell them what we're going to tell them. And we spent a year in this process with our political plan every day. Are they going to care when we tell the story? We would have that conversation every day. And a lot of times the answer was no, and we'd throw it out the window and start over. And the soil and water story was one of those where someone said, why are we even talking about this? Who cares? And the gentleman leading our charge said, well, let's make them care. Let's go tell them what that is. So it's not about soil and water. It's about caring about soil and water. And when you turn on the faucet, connecting those two things when you're hot and you need a cold drink. And that's the storytelling. That's the involvement in an area. I used to work in the upper Midwest. I miss those good people of Minnesota and Wisconsin who actually give a damn about where they live because it's home. And getting people to care about that, to make them interested in that, is a completely different editorial challenge.
So what was the actual soil and water series you did?
Well, it was just a story explaining why your vote for the person who sits on the Soil and Water Conservation Board matters and what they decide that impacts your drink of water at the end of the day or the beginning of the day.
Now, sometimes doing this kind of work requires resources, investigative journalism, enterprise journalism. And I know you did quite an extraordinary piece of enterprise journalism. Could you describe it?
So actually, we sort of started in a different route where management said to me, we have to look at the County Board of Supervisors, a level of government that's often not reported on. So I wasn't going to them saying we have to do this. They were coming to me saying you have to do this. But they gave me time. And basically, again, it was the challenge of the story. Okay, so I had to produce a half-hour documentary on the County Board of Supervisors. I didn't know what the story was. And that was the challenge. So in the end, after spending several weeks reading budget documents, the story really was, how are they spending your money? I've talked about this with my boss several times. It always is about money. In the end, we've elected them to do something, and that's to spend our money. And I found the story by reading these budget books for weeks and weeks, and the story was that we had five supervisors who had all been in office for 15 years or more. It turned out they all graduated from the same college. They were all Republicans, and they all had the same priorities. They all wanted to spend the money on public safety, and none of them believed in social programs, despite the fact that their job was to administer these programs. So by going through the budget, quite literally line by line, I could tell that story. And then we had all five of them come into studio, or we went to where they were, and do really long, in-depth interviews, which was the other big challenge. How do you get them to agree to this? And because it was an election year, two of them were up for re-election. Two of them had to agree, right? They kind of had to. Right. And then it was, once they've agreed, well, so-and-so agreed to do it. And so it took a long time. And again, it was 8 or 9 weeks of this process. And then because I had read these budgets, because I had studied them, you had a great interview, because they weren't hard questions. They were questions based on research. And what we discovered, they couldn't answer so many of them. They couldn't sort of give us a soundbite because we had the goods, right? Well, you spent money on this. You said there was no money, or you said the state was cutting. They told us over and over state cuts. And while there were state cuts, what we discovered, the state cuts weren't in the areas that they had claimed they were. They were in other areas. So in the end, I think our biggest challenge was, as you said, how do we make this interesting? 30-minute television show all about supervisors. And I think one of them was telling people who they were, which was basically one person. All five, they even in fact told us word for word some of the same stories when we asked them questions. And then, where did your dollar go? This is how much money this level of government is spending of your money, and how did they spend it?
Natalie, could you describe the impact of this?
Well, I think, you had asked at the beginning, sort of, how do you make it interesting? Does anybody care? And I think one of the reasons we wanted to actually look at the supervisors was it appeared nobody really cared. I mean, they were elected for every 4 years. And part of what we did in the show was we actually went out and sort of did the man on the street interviews. Who are they and what do they do? And nobody knows. And they have $5 billion budget of our money, and nobody knows, and nobody seemed to care. And we wanted to say, you probably should care. And it was sort of the idea of, do you feed them what they want, or do you feed them what you think they need to know? Right. And we actually said, we're going to feed you what we think you need to know. And I think so the impact was, we got letters from people who said, I had no idea. I had no idea. They're all still in office. For
the first time there was a runoff. For the first time in 12 years, the two who were up for re-election had faced a runoff election. They won in the runoff, but before that, there was no competition,
and so it's so I think for us it was shining a little bit of a light on a part of our community that people didn't think they wanted to know about, and maybe they do now a little more.
But I think it goes back to that challenge, though, as well, in terms of when we go to our bosses or our bosses come to us. I had 8 weeks to research. I mean, along the way, I told stories on radio and on our website, little things I was finding, and then we put them all together. But, I mean, I think a big part of it is time. So if your management who believes in this kind of reporting, that you're actually saying to your staff, you have this amount of time to do this kind of work. The bottom line for me, that's what I've learned from this process, is it just takes time.
And at KSL, you took time for investigative reporting, for which you've won a special commendation. Can you describe it to people who don't know what you are up to?
Why don't you start, John, since you started the project?
Sure. Well, as any political reporter knows, looking at campaign filings, you can find a gold mine of information, and that's kind of where this story started. In Utah, we have no campaign contribution limits. We're one of just a few states. So if you wanted to write a check to the governor or a statewide candidate or whoever for $500,000, conceivably you could. We haven't had any contributions of that magnitude, but it may be just a matter of time. In any case, back last fall, I started to look at the campaign filings for the governor, who was up for election in November, and noticed that he was taking some very large contributions. And some of those contributions happened to coincide with some meetings on his public schedule that they issued every week. And I thought that was interesting. So we could see in the case, the most prominent case, a road builder that was in the process of bidding for the biggest road project in the history of the state, $1.7 billion project, that the road builder was giving contributions to the governor. There were meetings on his public schedule around the same time. And lo and behold, a few weeks after the meetings, that road builder won the contract to build the largest road project in the history of the state. That was interesting enough, but then after we ran the story, this is a collaboration with the Deseret News, our partner. Our newsrooms had just merged within a week of the story. So the story ran on a Thursday. Over the weekend, Lisa Riley-Roach and I, she's my partner at the Deseret News, received some tips, and the tips indicated that there had been a settlement over the road contract. This was news to us. Nobody knew about this settlement. So on the following Monday, we started to call the State Transportation Agency. Actually, Lisa made the call, and I'll let you pick up the story from there.
Well, it didn't hurt that our tipsters let us know the amount of the settlement, $13 million. A secret settlement made without the Transportation Commission, without legislative leadership, without the governor, without any official knowing, just simply handled by the head of the State Department of Transportation. That really was the piece that I think made everyone focus on this story in a way they might not have had it just remained matching up campaign contributions with meetings with the governor. That certainly implied and raised questions about what kind of access those contributions purchased, what kind of possible influence those contributions may have had on the award of a contract. But that settlement really opened the door to and opened a lot of people's eyes to what it means when someone is able to give an unlimited amount of campaign contributions. It also didn't hurt viewer and reader interest in the story that there was a sex component. The contractor who John had discovered had given $50,000 himself and had a number of private meetings with the governor right before the contract was awarded, was just coincidentally romantically involved with a major player at the State Department of Transportation.
And he announced that himself, didn't he?
Yes.
Yeah, it was sort of a preemptive strike, I think.
Yes, it was a fascinating day. We talked earlier about trying to make people interested in a story like this. Well, I think being a multi-platform operation really was useful there because we were able to break stories on the web initially. Initially, John broke the story at night in a 10 o'clock piece that really laid out very nicely. I am new to television. I'm just marveling at how much information you can pack into Your stories were long though, right? They were like 2 minutes plus or something.
Well, no, they were longer than that.
For TV.
The original story, I mean, and this is actually a real tribute to our bosses, our managers at KSL, and their dedication to this kind of reporting. I think the original story, the tape time of the package was like 5+, which for a local market is unheard of. So we're really lucky that we had that kind of support from upstairs. Initially, when I turned that story in, my boss was like, wow, that's long. And then he read it and he said, I don't think you should cut a thing. So we're lucky in that respect.
And I think being able to build on that, a good, solid, long package, very good explanatory journalism, enough graphics to get the numbers and the other elements you need to tell that story effectively, but also the sound and the people involved. But then being able to build on that, the next day people were able to go to the newspaper, and the real political junkies out there were able to get a lot more context and detail and reaction to that piece. Plus, again, breaking things on the web and on our radio partner as well throughout the day kept interest going. And again, money and sex never hurts.
Tanya, these stories had an impact. Can you describe what followed?
Quite a bit of political fallout followed, and several stories after I went back just to review all of the stories the other day and realized the stories that John and Lisa did really continued for the next several months based off that one first story. It changed the scope of the campaign in the governor's election. It became a focal point for a considerable amount of the campaign. In our organization, what it did is, as Lisa said, or John said, it was the first week of the merger between the television station and the newspaper, and actually there's radio and web also involved in that also. It gave us a platform. They really created the model for which we were going to continue to say, this can be about better content, about raising the bar on content, not just streamlining operations, but how do we achieve better content in this arena? And John and Lisa's work is a shining example of that.
And there were also policy changes, weren't there?
Yes, policy changes followed after that. They can speak better to that than I can. They've covered it much longer than I have.
John, you want to just...
Yeah, the state legislature this past session passed legislation that would require any kind of state contract settlement to be okayed by at various levels of funding by the Transportation Commission, by the legislature, by the governor. There was an audit which the results just came back just a week or two ago. That was pretty scathing and critical of the way that the Transportation Department handles these kind of contracts. So in the future, they'll have to disclose any kind of settlements like this. Also, they've essentially, it's forced the agencies to completely change the way that they do these kind of things. And in another state, it might have toppled the governor, I think. Utah's pretty heavily Republican, and in the end, it wasn't too close, but it was a very serious challenge to him, and gave his Democratic opponent something to really run on, which he did.
So you had a newly merged newsroom. Christina, you're a kind of merged newsroom all in one, and what you need to do in order to do your job is different than had it been a dozen years ago or so?
Like 3 years ago.
Okay, describe that.
So in March of 2009, I worked for KNXV, so it's the ABC station in Phoenix, Arizona, run by Scripps Howard. And in March of 2009, we transitioned from reporters, which we no longer use, we're no longer reporters, to multimedia journalists, or MMJs. So we shoot our own video, we edit our own video, we also produce our own graphics using the editing software. What I think a lot of people fail to realize is they think MMJ is just kind of a diplomatic term for a one-man band. What they don't understand is that what we tried to do with the multimedia, and why that word is specifically in there, is to capture what we're seeing, the changes in our industry. So the multimedia is also a recognition of the various platforms that are so important now. So expanding our coverage to smartphones, to iPads, to the web, and also involving social networking, so Facebook and Twitter. I think even probably 6 months ago, if I would say that, I'd probably see some eyes rolling and a bunch of scoffs, right? Oh, Twitter, it's not journalism. I think what's changed is when we see what's happened in the Middle East and understanding the power and force behind some of these platforms and how they can be utilized and the strategy involved. So when we talk about multimedia journalists, it's sort of all those things have now been encompassed in the job that I do. And in fact, we just had training last week on how to involve social media in both news gathering, right, how to find stories, but also it's a wonderful way to engage with our viewers and how to use that as another delivery mechanism. And so, yeah, so it gets a little tricky, right? When you try to cover politics as an MMJ, it is something that can be a challenge. And so, for instance, one of the stories that was involved in this entry that won the award involved kind of putting the governor on the hot seat about a statement she made about some beheadings in the desert. She made a comment that there were beheadings in the Arizona desert. And so that moment's captured at 10, but the reason, the backstory is I called every coroner in the southern counties, right against the Mexican border, and checked with everybody. Anyone hear of any beheadings? What's the history of that? Well, all those phone calls aren't made on my shift, right? I work 2 to 11 p.m. So those are, I wake up at 9, 10 o'clock in the morning. I do have a morning free. Those are phone calls I make on my own time. So there is the juggling of, you do stuff that's, quite frankly, isn't on your shift, but I haven't really known any other way of life in the whole time I've been in the television business. So I'm sort of, everyone here I know makes calls on their own time. So there is a mix of that. But one thing that Scripps really looked at is, you have to keep in mind, we went full MMJ. So even our anchors, pick up a camera and they shoot their own stories, the whole newsroom. And so in a way, when you are the pioneer in something, you're also the first one to notice when there's maybe some things you could improve upon, right? You're the first ones doing it. And so one thing that they recognized is that we did need a little bit more time to sort of put our reporter hat a little longer. Because a lot of times you have to take off that reporter hat in order to shoot the actual video or edit the actual story. So one thing that Scripps Howard did with all the television stations is they involved work days, which means that we have at least one day a week where I don't have to be on TV. And it's literally just a day where I can research, meet with my sources, do your homework, basically, which I have to tell you is quite a blessing, because even take the MMJ model out of it altogether and you just have the old-fashioned two-person team, and no one has work days. Who the heck has a day to just be like, think and be creative and, do some, we're going to pay you to do homework. And commercial television that doesn't happen. And so I think that's a real credit to them, to recognizing that they really wanted to have stories that are better told and have more quality and have that investigative edge to the GA stories, and recognizing that we needed, like you said, time. A lot of things involve time. So for us, yes, there's a lot more in my day. You become really proficient at multitasking. We thought we were good at it already, but it's interesting. I've played this raw clip for some people, and I don't know if you're playing it at the ceremony, but when I asked the governor about the beheadings question, you have to imagine, I'm surrounded probably by 15 other reporters, right? It's all jam-packed. And I lobbed the question to her, and if you look at the raw clip above my head, I'm literally asking the question like this, is my cell phone, right? So I lob the question, and then she doesn't really answer it. And while she's not answering it, and I'm recognizing she's not, I pick up my phone, you see me in the raw video, snap a picture, send it to Twitter, and then ask the question again. Now on TV, you hear question, doesn't answer it, I come back with the question, she turns around and walks away. But in that time, I also tweeted. So it is multitasking. You're doing everything at the same time. But I think, once again, there was a recognition by our managers and by the company that owns us that we still need time in those days. And so, that's how we've been able to. And it's something that's really evolving. Is it going to stay like that forever? Will they give us more work days? Maybe. I think the work days are probably going to stay, because we've had some excellent stories coming out of ABC 15 that are literally all a credit to work days. Some just explosive, wonderful journalism that's being done just by giving us one day a week to breathe. So, but yeah, it's an evolving process, and we're learning.
So, new platforms, digital media, the internet, certainly raised in that story. I wonder if any of you would like to talk about your efforts in that realm. Go ahead.
Well, it's interesting when we talk about multi-platform, that's exactly what our station does. So in this 8 weeks that I have to produce a half-hour documentary, we also have a radio station, and we also have a very strong web presence in the community. So as I'm researching, one of the things I did was read the county supervisor's policy manual. I didn't even know they had one. Found out that they believe the Constitution should be changed so that if your parents were in the country illegally, despite you being born in the U.S., you shouldn't be a citizen. So that's one of their policies. we were able to put a radio story on about that. We also conducted a survey across the state of all supervisors. How long have you served? What party are you affiliated with? So on and so on. And we were able to blog about our findings and again do a radio story. So as we are researching for the documentary, we're reporting on multi-platforms. It's interesting about Twitter. I think one of the reasons I was able to get all 5 supervisors, I was tweeting, so-and-so just agreed to do an interview, supervisors so-and-so hasn't. So I kept calling them on that, right? Like, and at them so their followers would know, and so on and so on. So I think using that as well. But we also use radio to tell our audience what we're doing on television, that we're working on this story about the supervisors. What do you want to ask them? Or that's an example, but we constantly go to our audience on these platforms to engage them, ask them for their help, and then their stories as well.
Yeah.
That's part of what Natalie is oh, sorry.
From a web perspective, I think the web definitely enhanced John and Lisa's reporting, where John was saying he got 5 minutes on TV, which is a great amount of time in a local TV newscast, half an hour local TV newscast. But it still wasn't able to put every element from the emails, from the letters that had come into that story. Lisa was obviously able to do more in print, but on web, there are links that are embedded in the stories where you can go and read the entirety of. So if as a user, viewer, listener, whatever, we're on every platform, I don't even know what to call people anymore, but if you want the entirety of the story, you can go see exactly how they got to where they got in their reporting. There's a lot of transparency there.
Yeah, I think the web has changed the way we do everything. Because I was just watching one of our regular newscasts. I think it was last Friday, and I turned to my news director and I said, "Oh my God!" At the end of every story, it seemed we said, "Go to KIONrightnow.com to click on." We had documents, we had raw video, we had raw sound. Just everything you can't fit in a 30-minute newscast, especially when at the end of the day most of your packages are a minute 10, and you've got all of this great stuff. The web has just created this unique opportunity to drive viewers, and because the web is so interactive now, we get instant feedback from them as to, oh, did you know that this is happening also? And we're able to go, oh, no, we didn't know that, and go follow, 5 other stories. There was, this has nothing to do with politics, but last year there was that guy who opened fire outside the Pentagon. He happened to be from our neck of the woods, and when we tweeted it, we had 5 tweets saying, "Oh, I know exactly where he lives. I grew up with him. His parents teach at this school and this school," and we were able to then, cross-check, reference it, and make sure that it was all accurate. But it is. All of our folks are also multimedia journalists, and they're tweeting, they're Facebooking, they're sending pictures to people. And they turn 3 packages a day. But it's all because of...
May I hire them?
No. We also use the web, I think, to not only things that you don't have time for on a newscast, but things that might not be appealing to the broad audience. We have how many community sites now? 60 or 70?
64, I think.
All the different communities and suburbs in the Seattle area. So if there's a little city council issue, or even a traffic issue, or, it can be some small news, but we can put that on the web in that community site, and the people in that town can get it, where the people in the other town don't need it.
I think the web allows that small news to be, it's big news to somebody.
Yeah.
And the thing I'm hearing, we have an MMJ set up, and a little bit of a blended setup. In Orlando is a crime scene tape market. You feel left out if you wake up and you don't have any in your yard, based on what you see on TV news. But if you take this philosophy, ours is, we say it out loud, it's on the walls of the newsroom, that web equals air. The website isn't ancillary to television anymore. And it's in the tracking of that, and we all have our feelings about Nielsen and the accuracy of their reporting, but if you take those issues, we launch stories specifically from 9 to 5 to reach as many or more people than you will reach cumulatively, not on television, cumulatively, during a whole day. And television is not the primary driver on that. And for those of us who've been in the business for a long time, when you talk about politics years back, well, that's a story for print. We can't do that. Well, we can print now. And the merging of those mediums, we do it where it makes sense, not because we can, but because we should, where it appeals to those folks. But it is the great place for that small story that's big to somebody to get equal treatment.
Well, let me ask a question about a potential downside of that, which is the notion that might come from management that, well, we can do politics on the web. We don't have to do all this stuff on broadcast or on cable because we've got those other outlets. And so let's use our television platform for another purpose, which might, in fact, get higher ratings. Do you hear that argument? Does it make a difference?
Community service. I think that, you know, at the end of the day, we're here to serve our community, and while we can do more on the web than we can on television, you know, we can post a 10-minute story or a newspaper-type story on the web. At the end of the day, a lot of people still turn to the news as their traditional platform. They want to be able to see, they want to be able to hear, they want all of those things. And you can't do that on the same way on the web as you can on television. And, I mean, maybe that'll change in 10 years. And I know we all post video to the web right now, but it's not the same thing. People tune to the news. And at the end of the day, we need to provide our community with the most important things to them. And, I mean, politics is important. And it's, you know, as we've all kind of mentioned, politics is more than just, you know, the representative going up against the representative or who's running for governor. It's schools, it's the economy, it's water, it's desert. I mean, every community has its own issue, and at the end of the day, they all tie back to politics. It's just, maybe you don't use the word politics, but it's politics, and people turn to news to get that.
I think we are the great aggregators for people in television. I think that this is a room full of people obviously interested in what is going on in their universe, and we'll do a deep dive in any venue that'll let us dive in there. But the folks, the average person, viewer, customer, subscriber, whatever we call them, I think there's always going to be a place for the journalist, the aggregator, for that information. And I think we are just no longer going to be the exclusive place to get that. These venues have created an instant scratch for that itch that you have for an information, whether large or small. And that's the radical shift that we're seeing now.
Gwen and David, an analogous argument being made is, well, with all these other sources like online, we don't need public broadcasting because it's being done elsewhere. Do you hear that?
Sure, but it's not true because it's not being done elsewhere. In fact, I'd like David to pick up on this, because the truth is that part of our we have evolved at the NewsHour within the last 2 or 3 years into this multi-platform world. We were probably slower in lots of respects than a lot of people, but as a result, we've never had a conversation where we've talked about not doing politics on the air. We've always thought about how the web supplements what we do, how it adds to what we do, allows us to do more and not less. So we're in a fortunate non-commercial environment that allows that conversation. But I was having this discussion with the folks from KPBS earlier. That story about the Board of Supervisors isn't going to get done someplace else. It's just not. Now, that's nice that she had the time, not just a day a week, but she had weeks to read all these documents. That's not going to happen anywhere else. We're not competing with each other to tell these stories. The fact is, we are all complementing each other, I think, to tell these stories and to tell them better and better. And there's room for each of us, whether it's micro-targeting to a particular neighborhood or macro-targeting to the nation. I think there are lots of different ways to tell these stories, and it's more important than ever that they get told.
I just want to make 2 points. One about the public television question. The one thing we know to be true about the modern media environment is that sort of the gold that's out there to grab right now is differentiation, right? And how you present something unique, because you can look at the 3 network evening newscasts every night, and they're remarkably similar newscasts, right? Both in content and running order and all those things. You can look across 3 cable stations all day long, national cable stations, and see remarkably similar content. We at the NewsHour, and this is because it is public television, because of the time we have and how much more in depth we can go, I think we just have an instant leg up in immediately differentiating ourselves in a very noisy world, and that differentiation we have seen time and again, both on television but also on the web, really be able to have us find our audience a lot more easily than some of the other folks. I also just want to make a point. You have raised a couple times here the notion of ratings and politics. First, let me make one large point. I think anybody who was producing television during the 2008 presidential election will tell you that it was ratings gold, right? I mean, it was the entire country was tuned into this really exciting election. So politics is not always, I think, something that people roll their eyes at. Sometimes, as you were saying about the Tea Party movement, it's something that people really get engaged in, and not. Yes, I'll be the guy that defends covering the horse race for a moment, okay? Yes, it is really important that we cover the issues because they do impact people's lives. The horse race, to me, gets dismissed too easily. Part of what that whole horse race coverage is are these compelling characters who choose to offer themselves up for public service, who are going to be your representatives, sort of peeling back the nature of who these people are, what makes them tick, why do they get up in the morning, look in the mirror, and be able to see themselves as a leader of the free world or of the community or what have you. That's really interesting, compelling human drama, that sort of thing. And the other thing that I think helps the compelling sort of narrative in political coverage, elections are the opportunities when, whether a local election or a national election, we as a people get to hold up a mirror to ourselves, right? Look at who we are, decide who are we as a people, where do we want to go as a country, as a community. That's what elections are about, is that moment that you get to do that and I think that, in the ways I always try to think about that in our political storytelling, is that always have to think about the viewer on the other end. This is their moment to come together as a large community and decide who we are together moving forward. I'm going to take half another second, Marty, I'm sorry, to just make this point about ratings. I fear not that politics will get somehow sent to the web because producers are afraid of what it'll do to the ratings on television. My fear about political coverage on the web, I think it is more, quote-unquote, ratings-driven than it is on television in many ways. I think there are a lot of producers and managers who allow the time on air for the important political content. This notion of SEO, search engine optimization, and how to get your story up to the top of Google News or linked on Drudge or linked on the Huffington Post, that is driving a gazillion Sarah Palin stories a day, right, for sites, political sites across the board, generates so many clicks. She may not even be running for president or what have you, but that notion of getting those clicks, so ratings, and I think is driving political content on the web in a more precarious direction than ratings has ever driven political content on air.
You mentioned service. And I'm just wondering, a number of you local stations do service to your communities, including Get Out the Vote efforts. And could you just, any of you, describe some of the service you do for your communities?
The new Florida resident doesn't know where to vote, doesn't know where to register, doesn't know how to register. It's as simple as we do phone banks regularly in an election cycle and get thousands of phone calls from people that you might wonder privately if they should be living on their own because they can't seem to find their own pocket, but they have these questions and they're handled professionally and they're handled with respect and with care, and there are no stupid questions in these forums and it's not about them touching us all the time. It's about how we respond when they do reach out, and that's where the community service starts. We have an advantage where we are because we're held by private company, and the pressures on us have nothing to do with Wall Street. And we exist to serve the folks, the nearly 1 million folks who households who subscribe to the service, and if we don't cover these issues, we're not serving these people very well at all. But their ability to reach out to have a specific question answered, whether it's on the telephone and an email. They love Twitter. They love, because there's some anonymity to Twitter in a lot of ways where you don't have to pick up the phone. So they, yeah, we do those stories too about please don't think we don't know who you are. And but that ability to get those answers, the convenience factor, I don't mean to minimize that, but their ability to finally get their teeth into something in a way that they couldn't even, just 2 or 3 years ago, you were talking, it's just the vast growth in that ability to be of service to the community, but the community is becoming each individual person. Mm-hmm. And they're judging your level of caring, your level of commitment to how fast you can scratch that itch or how well.
Holly, you did get out the vote efforts too, didn't you?
Yeah, we did. That was all part of the problem solver umbrella, was get out the vote, where to vote. Going back to the problem solver voter guide, I think one of the most important things about that and getting an hour in prime for that was that we really did take the issues. There's so much noise with the campaign ads. It was just ridiculous. And while it was a great windfall economically for TV stations, it was really, really confusing to the voters. And you're right, some of them can't find their pockets. They can't find their front door. So to take those really heavy issues and to find a simplistic way to break them down, I think really makes a difference. And to speak to something else you were talking about with journalism and the web, and is that going to be our undoing? I think the reports of our demise are greatly exaggerated. If you look at the Pew Institute, all the research is people still trust local broadcasters to give them the news. And I think in politics, more so than in any other arena, there's so much noise and bipartisanship out on the cable stations in particular, and not, if you look at the panelists here, partisan, not bipartisan, partisanship. But look at everybody here. I don't think you see that in public TV. I don't think you see that in newspapers and in local news. And I think that's why people do trust us. And I think, one of the panelists used the word transparency. That's one of the things where the web really is a great partner for us. We can take the documents for a story we do, post all the documents on the website and say, don't believe us, go ahead and read them. I mean, we're interpreting them the best way we can to not have an opinion, but you go read them. And they don't get that in cable news. It's always there's an opinion, and it's not backed up by the documentation. And that to me is a great tool of the web for us in local news.
You go.
Just to pick up on what David was saying, and you asked about ratings as well, that I think just as sort of a producer and a reporter out in the field, my concern is not so much even that we're worried about ratings-driven reporting, but being that we're all excited about multi-platform, but sort of producing things that just produce content because you now have so many mouths to feed, so to speak, that we're dealing with the web and we're dealing, a lot of us, with radio and television, that what choices are we making in terms of our content just because it becomes content? And so I think that's sort of a direction we have to be wary of, that are we doing good journalism, meaningful stories, public service, because they are that, or are we doing it because we're attempting to generate content all the time? And I find that tends to be sort of the struggle, in the newsroom.
It's a tonnage game. Mm-hmm. It's a tonnage game. And I think that the other thing, though, that we have to give ourselves permission to appreciate is, the old thing, if a tree falls in the woods and no one's there, does it make a noise? We do these stories because we want someone to hear them. It's okay to have people watch your product. It's okay to do successful marketing. I don't want people to watch our stories because they think they'll die if they don't, but I want them to watch the stories.
Or they'll think they'll see someone die.
Or someone die. Or the crime scene tape that they don't have in their yard. But we have to give ourselves permission to appreciate the report card that represents to those stories that we're telling. If we're doing it just for the ratings, or if we're falling prey to that, then we will not be successful. But I think we're kidding ourselves if we don't have some appreciation or place some value in using those report cards we get from the web and from TV to let us know what people are responding to, even in how we tell those stories or when we tell those stories.
Just getting back to what you were talking about earlier about the web and how we see usage. Some interesting observations that we've made over the years. When you put things in the political section of a website, they don't resonate as well as they do when they're just incorporated into the overall news of the site. Okay, so our political sections, where we'll post biographies and voting records, which really serve as voters' guides and are great resources for people, don't necessarily get the same kind of traffic as putting the same story in with the mixture of news. So we've had to kind of rethink, how we structure those political sites. And the other thing is we're experimenting this year for the New Hampshire primary with hiring a journalist specifically for the web to do NewHampshirePoliticalScoop.com.
But it's behind a paywall.
Some of it is.
Yeah.
Some of it actually appears on. Well, that's part of it too.
I
but
need
that's
it for free. I want to read it all.
Well, that's part of the experimentation. It's pretty cheap, though. It's part of the overall experimentation because we're taking some of the content that he does and offering it as part of WMUR's site. But then for people who are really interested in the nitty-gritty details of the presidential campaign and also the state campaign, there's a paywall. But it's what is it, $1 for a week or $99 for a year. It's not super expensive, and we're trying to see as we get into the political, the presidential political season, whether or not there's a model there. Because, face the reality, we haven't really figured out how to really monetize the web. As news organizations. So
I just wanted to add one point on the ratings issue. Having come off this incredibly contentious period in Wisconsin, the audience was fascinated by that. It was just incredible to see how many people would tune in for coverage of the debate over collective bargaining and how it was done, and some of our state lawmakers fleeing to Illinois. It was a fascinating storyline that changed daily, and there was great audience interest in it. But it also raises a point that I think as broadcasters, at least most of us, need to think about, and I am concerned about it. In email, in voicemail that I received during that time, people are so hardened in their points of view, and they seem to have adopted, at least some of them, a mentality that they want to be, as my friend once described it, they want to be affirmed rather than informed. And I think that's going to be an issue we're going to have to deal with as local broadcasters, because people come to a story with a set of beliefs, core values. And when they don't see your coverage reflecting those core values, they're not happy. And they begin to judge you in all of your coverage as saying, we don't necessarily believe you. We think you're wrong in the way you're covering this, and so we're not really sure we're going to watch you anymore. Now, I know that's sort of an age-old dilemma for journalists, that people like some of our stuff and they don't like some of our stuff. But I will tell you that I think, as someone who watched coverage of what happened in Wisconsin on both Fox and on MSNBC, I didn't know what I was looking at. It was so far off the mark in terms of what was being reported. So that does concern me, that the expectations that people have based on their cable viewing habits are applied to their local viewing habits.
Well, we come into that a lot with covering immigration, which also relates to politics in Arizona. And I almost want to ask a question. Can I ask a question to the rest of the panelists?
No. That's what I wanted to do.
Because I am kind of curious about something. We talk about viewer engagement, that's wonderful. We talk about participatory journalism, that's fantastic. And I value the feedback we get from our community. But sometimes the feedback in terms of emails and comments under the threads, under the stories, will be interestingly very similar, maybe some sort of chain letter that was created by a certain group supporting a certain side in the immigration debate. At a certain point, sometimes when you get that feedback, you think, oh, our audience is really interested in X or really believes Y. At what point do you let that feedback inform the next story or your coverage?
I think very early on you decide that we don't cede our judgment to the rabble. And the comments are interesting in the context of knowing in general what people are saying, what they're thinking, what the debate is. It's not that hard to figure out the stuff that has been churned up and the stuff which is genuine. It's really not that hard. And we are so addicted now to response and to email response and to Twitter responses that we run the risk of ceding our judgment to what people sitting at home who have already a hardened point of view have decided. Now, one of the reasons we're in these jobs is because we get to decide. We don't stop listening, but we get to decide. And so you have to listen, you have to read, you have to take in as much as you can. But these silos that we've been talking about, where people decide what they believe, and then they turn to the channel that will tell them what they believe, is exactly what we have to be railing against.
Mm-hmm.
It's what we have to push back against as much as humanly possible. That creates a greater risk for our point of view. When I go to college campuses, kids say to me all the time, how do you not have a point of view about things? And I say to them, okay, so if I'm interviewing President Obama and I say, I think you're a great guy, will you ever listen to me again the next time I interview the president? Do you think I'll ever be able to ask him a hard question? Why would I want to form an opinion? That means I stop listening to the answers. And so I'm wary of people who've already made up their minds telling me what I ought to think or what I ought to do, how I ought to cover a story. And I want to read the letters to the editor. I want to read our email response, but I do it with huge rocks of salt in my hand because I assume so much of the people who are moved to write and who are moved to correspond are pushing a point of view, which is not what I'm there to do.
Does anybody on this panel think that in the next few years you will see, for example, a local affiliate say we are going to adopt a more political philosophy in our news coverage?
Yes.
And I'm saying this as someone...
Yeah, we have.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's coming, especially for stations that are maybe struggling for ratings and are trying to find an identity. I think that's kind of that's a concerning issue
we have,
for
and
some of us.
Just quickly, I'd like to talk about a couple of things that everyone's been talking about. And I know Gwen just said that you can't let other people influence necessarily what you say or what you do on the air. And I mean, I come from the Salinas Monterey market, and I mean, it's a very split market. I don't know if anyone here knows that place, but Salinas is basically 75% Hispanic. They speak Spanish. They're not a lot of white people there. There are not a lot of English speakers there. And a lot of them watch Telemundo or Univision. Telemundo is also run by us. And everyone else on the Monterey Peninsula has a very different point of view on how they view Salinas. And because we have a Telemundo station, a lot of our Telemundo folks, they cross over and they do coverage for us as well on KION, and they'll refer to people as undocumented workers. And I don't know if it was a intended writing campaign or not, but we got probably about, once we started our Telemundo broadcast and it started crossing over into the English broadcast, probably about 1,000 letters in a couple of weeks, emails, saying if we continue to refer to them as undocumented workers compared to illegal immigrants, they weren't going to watch us anymore. And at the end of the day, we had to step back and go, is there a difference between saying what undocumented or illegal? And we said there really isn't. We actually called our political folks, like our representatives, our senators, and they said, it doesn't matter. We refer to them both ways. And we decided as a station on the English language versions, we're going to refer to them as illegal immigrants because it's what our viewers wanted to hear them called. It may not be popular to do that. I mean, people may think we made the wrong decision, but at the end of the day, if they're both right, why does it matter one way or the other? But I had a question about...
Because it does matter, or you wouldn't have changed it.
Right. What?
Because it does matter, or you wouldn't have changed it.
Well, it does matter because we don't want to upset
Yeah.
Our viewers, and if they're both considered by the politicians who create the laws to be the same thing, to be undocumented worker or illegal immigrant.
But there's different.
Have you got no feedback at all to illegal immigrant? When you call now that you call them illegal?
No, none, because the Spanish-speaking audience watches Telemundo or Univision.
So they can't hear you say it?
Well, they can, but they don't have. It doesn't have the same impact to them. They don't care as much. It sounds. I know. I probably opened up a can of worms that I shouldn't have. I'm really good at doing that.
Worms aren't so bad.
What I will say is that in television and in other media, without conflict, no drama. So you are giving us a little drama here, which I appreciate.
Well, because it all goes back to what they were talking about in Wisconsin about affirm versus inform, and I think social media gives us a way of doing both of them, because during the broadcast and during our news segments and reports, we get to inform. And then our station takes, 30, 45 seconds in each newscast, and we open it up to the viewer on Facebook, where they can get affirmed, where we read responses from what people have to say about the stories we've posted on Facebook that day. And in that sense, usually, we have both sides of the debate, but they're feeling that their point of view is being affirmed.
I feel like sometimes, though, lately, and it's just another kind of question, I guess, in terms of, does it take courage, and is that the right word, to stick to balanced reporting? Because I feel like sometimes it's become that. Like, the more balanced you are, one side tries to rally to almost call you unfair because you brought another perspective into the storytelling process, and having the courage to say, we're going to bring you balanced coverage.
I think it really comes down to that bottom line of you have to present your stories in a balanced way. That's what it's all about. And so you read everything that they send you, and whether they want to be affirmed or whatever, you still go out and cover that story and get all sides of that story and try your best not to get any of your opinions in there.
I'm going to leap in there because that is a positive note where I would like people's memories to stay. Downstairs at the awards lunch, I'm going to introduce a couple of very special guests who have arrived. But for now, I would like you all to join me in thanking this amazing panel. And please join us downstairs to continue the conversation at the awards lunch.